Right, guys, while I am currently shareless, I thought we would do something a little bit different. And just so I don't feel so alone in the world, I am going to read some share horror stories that I've found on the internet because I have had some share horror stories. I'm sure you have, and strangers on the internet have also had them. So, yeah, let's have a look at what we can find. Okay, so Ratsy Girl has a horror story from quite a while ago, to be fair, but I think it's still interesting to read. So it starts with, "Hello all, it's been a while since I got last active on here. Some of you might remember me. I used to share a lovely Arab cross. I'll not go into details, but looking back now, I don't know why I stayed in such an awful share agreement for so many years. I grew really fond of him and we had a wonderful relationship and some great times. I falsely thought I was being supported by everyone involved with him, but they would actually say one thing and do the exact opposite. I'm not entirely sure where those people spent so much time and energy being so false and cruel, but at the end I left before wishing them the best of luck." Which, as you can imagine, was a very emotional time for me. It is very hard leaving a share. I knew he was in good hands, loved and well cared for, if there is any positives to take out of this. I was more or less aware of one particular person's duplicity, but somehow I was in denial. My other half had warned me many times and advised me to look for something else, but always came back with a silly excuse because I loved the horse so much. I have learnt my lesson now. Every one of you looking for a share, do not let your heart rule your head. It's a recipe for disaster. Only accept to see a horse if you feel it's right for what you want to do in your riding ability. And most of all, make sure that you and the owner and any other sharer get on with each other and are on the same wavelength. Also, deal with the horse's owner direct and no one else. And last but not least, it's always best if you have a written agreement." Now, that is very good advice, but I do think it can be very, very hard to be all on the same wavelength. You have to work you have to really work towards that. Unfortunately, though, she does then go on to say, "All I had was lies, concealed information, and hypocrisy. To add insult to injury, the very people I thought were my friends never asked me how I felt after I left, knowing how fond I was of him. 4 years sharing is a long time. It's a very long time. I've been racking my brain to see what I'd done wrong, but I can't see anything. I was well liked by the yard owner, her husband and daughter. Besides, they were the kind of people who would have serious words if you were doing anything bad. Anyway, after a short break, reconsidering things over, I'm looking forward to a new happy share now, and no need to tell you how picky I've become. This time will be right. I'd like to hear any horror stories you may have, so I know I'm not alone in this world." Which, that little bit at the end is so lovely because that's what I'm looking for right now. I'm looking for other horror stories, so I know I'm not alone in the world. Oh, bless. This post is really quite old, so I really hope that Ratsy Girl is doing good and maybe even got their own pony. I want a little update. Now, in the same feed, there is an awful story where Millie has said, "I shared an Arab cross a few years ago. I started off having him 2 days a week, which was fine. Went up to 3 when the other sharer quit. Then his owner started ringing me every day asking if I could go do him. She often wouldn't ring me until 4 p.m, meaning I had to beg my parents for a lift because I knew if I didn't go, no one else would do him and he'd be left in his stable with nothing. That is horrific. You shouldn't have a horse if that's what's happening. It got worse and worse until I started to just go up every day. I bought his feed, wormers, paid for his shoes, had to ring the owner to tell him when he needed the vet as she didn't notice he was ill as she never came to see him. The owner wasn't paying the livery bill either, so I was getting the caught in the middle, which was awful." That sounds horrific because, as well, she's asking her parents for a lift. So either she just doesn't drive, which is fine, or this is a child paying for all of this stuff. That's not good. I hope they're not doing this on their own. One day the yard owner came over to me and demanded I gave my pony's tack as a way for the owner to pay the bill. but I told him that everything except the saddle was mine, and instead of taking it, he told me he was locking the pony in the stable till the owner paid the bill. So halfway through mucking out, the farmer came along and told me to get out of the stable, shut the door and put a huge hay bale in front of the door. So I was left to do everything by passing buckets, etc. over the door. He then said the owner had a week to get off the yard or he'd take the pony. Oh my God, that is a horror story. And it still goes on, and I don't know if I can read it. About 3 weeks after we moved, the pony went very lame, but the owner wouldn't get the vet, which was horrible, and rang me one night to say she was moving to Spain in 4 days and asked if I wanted the pony. My parents wouldn't let me have him. He was old and would cost a lot in vet bills. A bit later, the ex-yard owner rang me, telling me that he was coming to collect the pony the day after, as the owner had given the pony to him. The owner then rang me to ask if I could sort everything out, load him up, and take him as she was going to Spain. Oh, the day he went was awful. The ex-yard owner arrived with his wife and daughter to collect him, and I was in tears. I loved that pony as if it was my own. Knowing he was going back to the yard owner that I hated was horrible. It's a day I'll never forget, and it was the last time I ever properly saw the pony, as I refused to go back to the old yard. Oh, I have a sharer for my own horse now, and I would never put my sharer in a position that I was put in. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, that's insane. Oh, that poor girl. Wow. I think these horror stories are too horrible. Like, my horror story that I've just been through wasn't even this bad, and I feel bad for calling it a bad horror story now. Basically, there was this beautiful, beautiful schoolmaster that I was riding. I only rode him like 4 or 5 times. The owner of him wanted me to have lessons, which was completely fine. I'm more than happy to do that because that's what I was doing with Jem. But the caveat was the lessons had to be with her, not a trainer. She was really, really difficult. There was evidently a lot of miscommunication between us. She was telling me to put more leg on, but then he was going faster, and bless him, he was trying to go into canter, and like we were getting frustrated at each other, like myself and the owner, during this lesson. And at one point she was saying I need to rise slower, which I was struggling with because obviously Jem has very short, choppy trots, and I've gone from a 16-hand horse that now has a very big stride. So one thing that my aunt did when I was struggling was she would count the rises for me, just so that my brain could get into a better rhythm. So I asked this lady to do this, and she said, no, I'm not doing that for you, just do it. And it was really disheartening to have a trainer be that way with you. She was meant to be training me, and I just felt like she was angry at me that my riding wasn't good enough, but she's meant to be my trainer. So eventually, like, basically, if she was my trainer that I had hired, I would have just fired her. Like, I would never have her back again. But obviously, because she's the horse's owner, it's more difficult. You can't do that. And then you're left in a position where ultimately you just have to quit the share because it's just not working. And yeah, that's what I did. And I don't even, like, compared to these stories, I do not feel like that's a bad story. I feel like that's just normal. Oh my God. So this is from HorsyGirl19. She says, my first share was an Anglo-Arab mare that looking back was too fat and was being ridden in tack that was incredibly old and rickety. The stitching was starting to come off the bridle and there were holes in the saddle. And also, I had a I won't work attitude. Only being 14, I didn't really have much sway or confidence to say anything. So I ended it 2 weeks later when she started doing mini rears. Nowadays, I think instead of just abandoning her, I'd look into her tack properly. Well, you can't think that as a 14-year-old, that's not for you to, like, take that on, that's too much. Second share was absolutely awful. It started fine, and then I would turn up on my days and be told that I couldn't ride because one of the other liveries wanted to. Obviously, they had no concept of sharing the school. Oh, okay, not the horse, the school. Or that her tack had been locked in the tack room, which I didn't have the key to. The other liveries, bar 2, flat out ignored me, only approaching me to tell me I was doing something wrong or I wasn't good at whatever I was doing. I carried on through it all, focusing on the mare, but eventually it all got too much. I'm a very social person anyway, and the worst thing for me is someone flat out ignoring me. The mare I shared was a very good jumper, just getting old, but I never jumped her out of a lesson for fear of getting shouted at. In fact, I rarely rode her on my days because I either didn't get the chance to, or I didn't want the attention that would have come with it. Oh, the straw that broke the camel's back for me was after 3 months of being completely ignored by everyone at the yard, having the bossiest woman there come into the school and lecture me on how I was riding wrong and that I was lucky not to get bucked off. The mare was a complete sweetheart. She'd never shown any signs of malice when I was riding or intention of getting me off. Later that night she asked me, as if I was 5 years old, but I'd been around horses for 12 years at that point, whether I'd done the mare's rug up right. Me thinking something looked wrong, checked and everything was fine. And then when I returned from the field, if I shut the gate. Oh, that's sad. This story is a little bit different. It's from Zeus Cleo Harmony. Now, they are an owner that had a sharer, and it's a horror story from their perspective, which we can't leave out because when we say share horror stories, we fully know that sometimes the sharers are the problem and sometimes the owners are a problem. And sometimes it's not that either one obviously isn't a problem and it just doesn't work out, but we're looking at the worst of the worst and we're looking from the perspective of the person telling the story. So they may not be reliable narrators all the time. We are just getting from the person who feels like they're the victim, whether that be the sharer or an owner. So I couldn't do this whole thing without including some owner horror stories about their sharers because we can't leave them out. They are important part of the sharing situation too. Zeus Cleo Harmony goes on to say that several months ago I advertised for a loaner sharer for Archie because, as you all know by now, I broke my collarbone and was incapacitated until recently. Now that sounds like such a horrible injury. I hope that they didn't break their collarbone from the horse because that would be like a red flag. I wouldn't want to share a horse that broke someone's bone. Anyway, I was inundated with replies, but most people wanted to move him from the yard I kept him at. While I considered it ultimately, I could not bear for him to go, fearing that he would either come back a different horse to the one that left, or that they would love him so much and I would feel guilty and he would never return. No. My last inquiry was from a local girl who introduced herself and explained she'd ridden all her life, was used to horses, big, small, all sorts, and helped out at a riding school, and was more than competent, her words, not mine. She wanted a horse to treat as her own on scheduled days, which I didn't have a problem with, because this will help her learn the ins and outs of owning a horse. She rode him, and he was a very, very good boy. However, it was apparent she was pretty much a sit there and let the horse do the work kind of rider, and I explained to her that he wasn't a school horse and needed riding. Alarm bells rang, but I thought that everyone has to start somewhere and I would give her and wanted to give her the chance. All I asked for in exchange was for her to poo-pick his field every day and contribute £6 per week towards his shoes. He is shod every 8 weeks. She said she wanted to do him as much as possible, and because I was so poorly, we agreed for her to do him 4 days a week to be reviewed. I asked on several occasions whether she wanted me to meet her at the yard, but she assured me she was okay and not to worry. In normal circumstances, I would have gone up several times to keep an eye, but I was so poorly and wasn't able to drive. I really did rely on her and rely on what she told me. In the course of approximately 6 weeks, 2.5 of which she was on holiday, so this girl only did 3.5 weeks, she managed to get dragged from the field to the yard on several occasions. Oh my God. I thought he was turning into a monster, but he was okay for my friend. She moaned about poo picking, which takes 10 minutes a day, 1 barrelful, and only rode a handful of times. It was either too cloudy, too hot, or she had a headache. He ended up in the pond on the yard because she didn't tie him up after a ride, and then finally emailed me to say that she didn't want him to do him anymore because all she did was poo pick and the journey was too far. He was in the pond. Oh my God. God. I said that I thought it's best for all concerned. Oh my goodness, if that was my horse, I would have asked her to stop sharing before she emailed me. That was like after he was in the pond. I said that I thought it was best for all concerned that was that. But it's totally left me never wanting to trust another person again with my boy. I can see why. Especially the pond episode, yes. There could have been all sorts in there. Old farm machinery, and I know there's some very rare newts in it, so the farmer's wife wasn't best pleased that they'd been disturbed, and I don't blame her. I saw a lovely advert for a mother and daughter wanting to learn the ropes in view to getting on their own. Where I once would have rung them up and helped them out, I just don't want to take the chance, and I've really been scared for the whole episode. Some of it I know self-induced, but nevertheless it was very traumatic. Thankfully, Archie is none the worse for his dunking. Oh my God, that's not good on all parts, really. I think from the sounds of it, the child was going up there on her own, and really she should have had an adult or an experienced adult around her. And I hope that this person messaged the mother and the daughter, because that sounds like it could be a better situation. And I hope their collarbone got better, because ouch. Okay, that is all the share horror stories I can find without writing a post on Facebook. And honestly, I might actually, because they were so interesting to read. So if you've had any share or loan or just yard horror stories, let me know in the comments, because I just literally cannot get enough of this. But I do also feel like it's completely fixed the bug that I had in me of needing to know I wasn't alone, because actually reading these horror stories has just proved that I'm just being pathetic. My horror story is not a horror story. Some of those were horror stories. I mean, we had a pony in a pond. It's not good. So let me know in the comments any of your stories. Don't forget to give this a like. Please subscribe. Although I don't have a share at the moment, I'm looking, I'm searching, I'm trying. We will get there. I'm positive. I am positive that we will get there, because I can't keep being a negative Nelly about horses, because otherwise I'm going to fully quit horses. Can't do that. I can't possibly quit horses. So I am positive we are going to find a share, I can assure you. So yeah, please give this a thumbs up, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.